Smars here, and welcome to the video commentary for Myth of Eustro, Chapter 1. So, I'm trying to, I'm trying to think. I definitely I wanted to introduce as much of the world like early on as I could, but I especially wanted to show like the Nightmare Forest. Um, and I mean, along with like all the like the discarded pages that were supposed to be covered in there was actually supposed to be some pages that were they showed a lot of it, the the whole world, well, not the whole world, but a lot of the world covered in snow. It was supposed to be sort of a side effect of the cloud coverage of the Nightmare Forest. But I thought about it. I was like, no, I don't really like the idea of uh, this perpetual winter. So I just sort of I got rid of that, and I decided that I would just fully cover the land in the crystal formation, because it was just supposed to be like uh, sort of clumps of crystal formations sort of growing out of the ground, and then the snow. And I decided to just go with full crystal formations, like it just imagining if you're walking around on it, the ground crunches under your feet like I don't know, like walking on shale. I don't know, but it's just it crunches. It's very crunchy. I mean, but honestly, there's no one would be able to walk around out there. That's just it's supremely dangerous. Um, it, no one could survive for very long in the heart of the Nightmare Forest. But I I mean, I've never been big on well, cold weather personally, and so my work often reflects that within its worlds where it I usually create subtropical worlds. In this case, I think there have only been a few stories where I've compromised. This is one of the ones where I actually compromised, where some of the world does get winter, some of it doesn't, and that was me realizing that I kind of wanted at some point later on in the story to for the character, the environment to shift. But enough about that. Um, so the way that I definitely wanted like the story to start off with sort of just introducing the reader to the environment, and so there are a lot of uh, there's a lot of information that's sort of it's dumped early on in there. There's a huge info dump and a lot of dialogue with a lot of definitions early on, and it's sort of a way of introducing people to the sort of the elements that are going to reoccur, the text that you can highlight, and actually it'll take you to sort of pop up definitions and things like that, and but then most importantly though, I wanted to establish that world, and then slowly bring in like the main character. And I went with the with protagonist narration so that I could have a stronger voice throughout the entire series, really. But unlike most series that I actually create, I wanted Eustro to have like a good deal of internal monologue, and um, so it definitely starts off with Ramona sort of talking about her experience first, and then we sort of get right into her life. But the just technically, I mean, you could think of a lot of the what's introduced early on is sort of meaningless in a way because none of it, not, I mean, well, none of it really has meaning um, in the first chapter that you could possibly, I mean, the first chapter of this book, um, everything is brand new, but I wanted it to feel familiar, um, and I wanted it to feel lived in. Uh, and so I didn't start off in a place like I normally would. I would normally start further on into the middle. You know, I'm big on in medias res, but I originally started the story much further into the story, where more characters were introduced already. You know, all the characters were already established. But I thought instead started a little bit closer to at least the beginning of their relationship. You know, the relationship of all the characters that I would like to introduce uh, as mainstays within the story. Um, but the introduction of Ramona just sort of I needed her to come off as I needed her to be powerful. I needed her to be to just instantly seem um, like she's full of adventure, full of fun, full of energy, and like she just she's an adrenaline junkie, and I needed that to come across really quick while I had narration going. I needed visually to show um, cues that were setting up the story, making it a familiar scenario, um, while at the same time, I'm trying to think how to explain it. I needed to have the story in, as far as the dialogue, tell you one thing, but then the visuals tell you another aspect of the story. So you have these two things going side by side, and then they sort of come together at the same time to sort of bring us up to speed in the sort of contemporary story. Um, I had a lot of fun with this actual picture. Where I went through so many different versions of it, um, trying to get a nice little balance. Uh, anyways, um, the Baroth, which was created at a convention, just completely random. But I needed the story to start off with a fairly low level enemy, a low level monster, something that is um, fierce enough that a threat can be perceived, a threat is understood, but weak enough that someone like Ramona could actually fight it and win. And this one is it's bigger than normal. They're normally like little, I don't know, sheep-sized animals. They're tiny, but this one is big, and we'll get into that later on in the story. Um, but yeah, and then the introduction of the first of not many, but um, certainly a healthy cast of characters. I hope that will be enjoyed. Effie, um, who is the that sidekick conscience that I love to do that kind of character for the protagonist. I need them to have sort of an external consciousness, um, just that little, almost a literal voice on your shoulder kind of thing. Um, and that's what he is for her. He's just kind of that voice that keeps her a little bit in line. Sometimes he does, not always, because well, later on in the next few chapters, he sort of goes off on his own and gets into his own kind of mischief. Um, but again, there's just the display of uh, setting up the way that a lot of this just the system of the comic and with the links and um, I don't know, I actually thought it would be really fun to do that because you just see it in video games so often, especially in I'm not sure why that trope arose in uh, role playing games, but just the different colored text signifying different aspects of the world the world that you're in, and I don't know, I've gotten so used to it. I love it, and I thought it would work perfectly for a comic, and I wanted to actually do it long before now, but it just never felt appropriate for any of the other books that I was working on. And um, the only other I wanted to do um, work where like you have in comics you have the editor you have like little editor's notes where they'll mention, oh, you can check out uh, such and such chapter issue such and such where this thing happened, and it'll just be a little box in the corner of a panel, and um, I always loved those because every now and then it would be just interesting enough, the thing that they were telling us about, that I would actually go to the comic book store and I would try to find whatever issue that was that they were referencing. Um, and I love that concept, that idea. So I wanted to do that, especially for like the other book that I work on, Goblin, and then Munch Chunky, and I wanted to do those. I wanted to do that inside of those, but I wanted it to be where the editor's link would actually you could either click on it and it would take you directly to that that chapter and that book, or it would actually bring up uh, those pages. Those pages would overlay, and you could just go through them. It was a little bit more complex. It was kind of complex trying to get um, a comic inside of a comic to work and function and make it so that you could exit out of that comic when you were done and go back to the original. It was really complex and a lot of broken code, but um, in the end, I went with just sort of basic standard pop-ups that happen when you hover over the text. Um, oh, and then we have Ramona's her transformation, um, and all her her basic forms. They do have like I have names for them. I don't really talk about the names of them, but I thought it would be necessary to sort of show early on, sort of give a taste of uh, what she can do, and it's sort of that again. It's going playing with like sort of video game tropes. It is sort of a Metroidvania style storytelling where I'm sort of showing all the powers. You know, you get it all in the beginning and then it's taken away, and sort of that's what's going on now, where I'm showing um, up front all this stuff, all these powers, all this awesome, and then I take it away, and then we sort of pull back and uh, and then go into the story again and sort of explain how. You know, that's sort of the giving back of the powers little by little, is explaining a little bit how the world works, why the world works, how the powers work, why the powers work, seeing other characters as they actually use their powers to, and that's the way that I would explain it. I tend to not have the characters flat out explain it. I want them to just show, and for the readers to sort of get a better understanding. Um, and that's one of the things that I definitely had to work with this story, where initially I had the characters flat out explaining this idea of Ramona's transformations and how they work and why they don't work, or why they do work only some of the time, uh, and instead I just, I cut it down to really just this, where he's like, see, you got it on the first try, and it's just, you're supposed to have an understanding of maybe she can't always, and how she was argumentative, and but there was a lot more dialogue and a lot less action, and it was really, really ridiculous. And so I had to figure out a way to sort of cut it down and um, spice it up, I guess. And this definitely, I like the way that this turned out. Especially, I really like this scene of her sliding. That's really cool. Um, yeah, I love the fingers digging into the ground. That was fun. Weird amount of layers on just that one piece. There are there's a lot of experimental stuff in this chapter that um, a lot of it is weird offshoots of experimental stuff from Goblin. Goblin in itself was an experimental book that allowed this book to happen, which was kind of the point. Um, it was a lot of learning in Goblin that set it up so that I could actually create better stories for the future. And Myth of Eustro, for me, is a much better story than any of the other stories that I've ever worked on, because it is wholly conceptualized. I actually thought about I thought about the entirety of the story, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and actually planned it more than I have ever planned a story as far as development. Um, but because of that, I'm very always very antsy, like from chapter to chapter, because I know the direction that the place that I want to get to, and I want to get there now. But it's definitely worth, I think, worth the wait, um, and then more showing off of these powers. Um, she originally did something in here that I'm not even gonna mention it now because it's a gag that I want to save for an upcoming chapter. Um, but I really enjoyed this, like the actual stalactite that actually shoots into him, and then it electrocutes him, and then you see the X-ray of it. Um, that took a very long. It took a really long time to um, create. And actually, it took a long time because I didn't know how the heck it was supposed to work. I didn't know how I was going to get all the visuals to work. I had to do about 3 different layers of just the electricity that's happening all around it. I had to do 3 different layers of that because the color changes as it crosses in front of the image. And so I had to actually do different versions of it so that you could still see it, because the blue that's around the outer edges of him, it won't show up against the blue that's actually the shadow, the silhouette. Um, it won't show up against that, and it was really weird because I had an idea in my head of what I wanted it to look like, and I wanted it to all be all blue, but then it just would not show up with this particular layer effect. It all just, there was a lot of last minute panic going on with every single page in this chapter. Um, and like I was saying, there was a lot of experimenting, a lot of last minute experimenting and realization. But since then, I'm really happy with where it went, because after this chapter, pretty much it kind of everything went up, because I had an understanding of where I wanted, how I wanted the art to look, how I wanted the style of this uh, series to be. Um, I had an understanding of the color palette and the type of effects. I knew that I wanted a much brighter palette, than really any other series that I've done. Maybe Munch Chunky probably is a good contender for bright color palettes, but I wanted this world to seem much more vivid, much more colorful, happy visually. I wanted it to look very happy, but then the story to be sort of it sort of goes against that, where I wanted the story to seem very dark and sort of uh, just this impending, sort of this looming doom, that is the nightmare forest, where we're very unsure. I wanted everyone to be very unsure of what it is, but they know that they're kind of freaked out by it. And then you have this very happy, upbeat, colorful world, and then this silly character like Ramona and Effie. Um, and that's just sort of that weird natural part of me, where I have never been able to sort of help that, where I couldn't get over the fact that I have such a cartoonish style. Um, I've never been able to get around that, and I had to. I say that I've never been able to get around it. I've never been able to get around it, but I had to get over it. And the reason why I had to get over it was because it was something that was it it kept me from really breaking into like what I initially wanted to be, was a mainstream comic book artist. I wanted to work for Marvel, but there was no way that a guy like that had my style was going to ever um, make it there. And so instead of completely changing my style, I decided to sort of go with this balance, because it comes out naturally this way visually, and yet you would think, and certainly many people have assumed when they find me on the internet by looking at my work, that it's going to be funny, that it's going to be humorous, but that's not the way that my brain works. My brain, well, I am fairly goofy kind of guy, personally, but when I write stories, the way that the storytelling portion of my mind works, it's very serious. It's kind of dark, and it doesn't it doesn't see things the same way that my creator, the part of me that creates the artwork does. The way that the side of me that creates the artwork, I'm not sure what that is. I guess it's the part of me that very early on was exposed to some of the silliest stuff in the world, and maybe it just never really grew out of that. But I like the duality of it, the serious story and the very uh, expression, the the artwork that's just, it's full of expression and life, and it's very bouncy and colorful, and I like that. I like that weird sort of balance, that weird sort of relationship that goes on in there. And I want that to sort of, I've embraced it enough that I kind of want that to be my signature, and I want more people to sort of recognize that. Um, and I sort of had to back away from trying to get picked up by um, major publishers, because they can't recognize that because of the way that their industry works, their portion of the industry works, so that for the most part they go with what sells, and really what sells uh, for a more mainstream audience, a wider, they're trying to cast a wider net, and my work obviously is going to only appeal to a very specific audience, and I'm okay with that. And Eustro definitely is speaking to a specific audience who understand uh, video game tropes of a specific type of video game. This was another trope that I love about video games. It is the dropping of items, loot in video games. It's such a weird thing that it happens, and I don't know that I've ever played a game that commented on why stuff drops. Why, when you kill a monster or destroy something, it turns into something else that you can go and cash in possibly. And so I went with that. I was like, well, I'll have a reason. And I just naturally applied the monsters and the crystals that they come from back around into the item that they drop when they are destroyed. And it is a different type of crystal that they become. And it can be monetized. And that's sort of the loot drops. But it's something that I don't know. I thought it was funny, but I will. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and talk about these panels. This scene here with Ramona drooling, and then this scene here with her frowning at Effie. Um, I will say right now that like so much of this chapter, I learned um, what this bit of advice that I had actually gotten from an animator a long time ago finally meant. And one of the things that they were saying was the reason why you do things like turnarounds and a sheet of action poses for a character is so that you have a better understanding of that character from multiple angles, and so that you really can see what this what this character looks like in what it does is it exercises that muscle so that you know what that character, what can and can't be done with that character, and you see it and you actually see it a lot if you can find a lot of animation production work, and you see like a lot of the character design sheets, they often hand out sheets where it shows the do's and the don'ts for designing a character, because there's just some stuff that a character you're not supposed to design them in a certain way, because either that character would never do that, never look like that, or it makes them look a specific way that's undesirable. And that's what was happening here. Um, I don't like the look on Ramona's face in those two scenes. And I after this chapter came out, I decided that that was something that I would never do again. I would never design Ramona to make this face or these faces this way. I would try to find a more creative way for her to look like that. I just don't like the look of it. It looks far more deviant than I want it to look, and less bored by what Effie is saying. And so and And the reason why it looks that way, the reason why it came out that way, is because I did not sit down ahead of time and draw out all the different possible facial expressions that Ramona could make. And I've since then gone through and done a sheet of all these different facial expressions and realized what her face would look like if she was bored. And it doesn't look like that. It doesn't look anything like that really. Um, but you know, you live and you learn. And the second I started sketching down those, I realized exactly what that bit of advice meant. I forget who um, I forget who it was that actually was giving that advice. I will say I'm in this chapter. Ramona looks she looks really young, but she did start off 10, just like Jeff. She started off, there was like a 10-year-old version of them. And then, bef- just really quickly, within months, I aged the character up. And Ramona she was tiny initially. And I don't know why I thought that should be a thing. And then I immediately was like, no, let's go about 15, 16. That's a good age to start a character off and then have them actually age throughout the series. Um, But in here, you can see there are times when she looks fairly young, and then times when she looks about her age. Uh, and that was me still really getting comfortable with the character. But uh, definitely, a lot of exposition going on here, where we're sort of explaining what's going on, trying to give some clues. My natural sort of need for mystery in a story. I'm big into mystery stories. I love mystery, and so I wish I could be a mystery writer, um, but I'm never able to weave the threads of a good mystery completely. It's always a little loose. There's always a little, just little bits of it just kind of coming apart at the edges. It's a little frayed, and so things tend to fall apart a little. But with this one, I try to stay away from too much mystery and just letting people know almost up front what a lot of this world is about. Um, and that really comes from me taking a cue from just having really been introduced to sort of the manga system and the way that works. I've always been into manga um, since I was very young, but I never knew how that world worked behind the scenes. And then being introduced to the series Bakuma and uh, having the creators of that story, having been very popular uh, manga creators, and then going back and sort of telling the story of how that works, how that can work, and going up, coming up from nothing, and then going um, through an entire production process with meetings with editors, everything. But what it did was it showed some elements of the creative process that, while I thought about them, I didn't I didn't see them as truly necessary for the way that I tell a story, because um, even though I grew up reading manga, I very much believe in Western storytelling. And Western storytelling is less direct. It's it it tends to sort of dance along the outside of the story and expects you to be curious enough to go in and uh, and to sort of unbox the mystery on your own. It's sort of a reward. You're sort of rewarded for your curiosity, and I've always loved that. I grew up in this kind of in this this environment, and so I love that kind of storytelling. But I love the sort of passion and the directness of Eastern storytelling, where it is sort of for the most part, everything is sort of given to you. You're given a lot of what is going on up front. There's a lot that's handed to you, and for a long time, I was sort of at odds with that, where I was very opposed to that kind of storytelling because I thought it was too hand-holdy. Of course, you have to there has to be that clear understanding of the lines that are drawn between the different age groups for manga, and a lot of manga that the majority of people read is uh, is like, well, like shonen manga, which is it's actually made for a fairly young audience. And granted, it's a young Japanese audience, which is different than uh, a young American audience or a young European audience. So it's Western age demographic is different than Eastern age demographic, it seems. And my point though is that while it seemed like there was more hand holding, there's while that seems like it could be a bad thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing because in that particular field, in that branch of the industry, it actually creates competition in a very weird way, in that you get a lot of crazy uh, story concepts in manga that you don't necessarily get in Western storytelling. Western storytelling tends to follow because of um, that that sort of storytelling uh, mentality of the mystery lies within, and you have to sort of go in to get it. You're not going to get the weird stuff on the outside. You get the very average stuff on the outside, and it gets weirder as you go in. Whereas with manga, everything, all the weird is on the outside, and the further you go in, the the more interesting it gets because the more normalized it can become, um, and it becomes more solid, and uh, you get a lot of character depth the further in that you go. But you have to sort of that the reason why it's so absurd on the outside is it's because they need that hook. You need that hook to sort of get people in initially, and to sort of I guess really you have to not only just establish that world, and you have to create interest. You have to be able to maintain interest, but you have to give them a reason for wanting to invest any future time. So you give them everything or a lot of everything up front. And it's just an interesting way that these two societies, environments work. These two versions of a very similar industry work, and I love seeing crossover. There are a lot of creators now that do a lot of crossover. They do a lot of they grew up in the sort of the same kind of environment that I grew up in, where they were exposed to both kinds of storytelling. And of course, a lot of them they figured it out a lot earlier than I did, and have a far better understanding than I do. But um, you're seeing a lot more um, balance and I actually like that kind of stuff. Um, but wow, I really went off on that was a serious tangent there, um, about story, sort of. Anyways, so having said that, the reason why I said that was because I introduced so many elements in the first chapter, and for a long time I was debating whether or not it was too much stuff, whether it was an info dump, and whether or not it was too much stuff to sort of um, saddle my readers with. And I realized that I needed people to come into the story and almost immediately understand what they were dealing with, and I needed them to also have fun. I needed I needed them to come into the world and enjoy the world they were in, and I wanted them to um, I wanted the characters to sort of I needed them to understand what the characters were about in a way that I've never actually done before, where I leave it up to the long game that is mystery, and I went with something completely different with the way that I approached this entire series, uh, and another aspect of it was this character, which took many development turns. Um, in in fact, starting off life as not only a man but a human. So a lot has changed, but um, I mean honestly, in all honesty, uh, the character that Ramona started off as was an elf and not um, half human, half goblin. And so there are a lot of interesting shifts and turns, and but I thought they were a lot of them were necessary in order to make the story work, to have a better flow. I didn't. I felt like the this elf character I didn't want her to be a man. After a while, I switched it. I switched it actually a long time ago from being a man, and decided that she would be an elf because I wanted the elf character to be back in the story, um, which was the original story, but I didn't want it to be Ramona. Um, and I think I because I personally I just think that elves they just they get too much glory in the world of fantasy. I think they really do. Except there there are some versions of elves that I've become very much aware of in the recent year or so that are not so glamorous, and that's cool. Um, but I never quite understood how elves got to that point, where they became these glamorous, beautiful creatures, and I don't know I went with just sort of average creatures. You know, I wanted them to be familiar in some way, and so I went I went with cats a long time ago for elves, but I had three different types of elves, and I went with wood elves, dark elves, and then just basic elves. And because those are the types that you tend to see show up really frequently, and I gave them to three different types of creatures: cats, bears, and rabbits. And the regular elves were cats, the wood elves were bears, and the dark elves were rabbits for obvious reasons. Um, and eventually that all changed. Eventually, um, the dark elves became dwarves for obvious reasons, and the bears became brownies um, for not obvious reasons. But um, there were just a lot of really weird changes, and uh, I wanted there to be a parental figure, which is something that doesn't exist in a lot of my stories. Um, I honestly had to sit and think about that for a very, very long time. I had to try to figure out if that was an issue that I had with, my parents, or if that was just sort of um, something that I enjoyed about storytelling. And I realized it was more so something about storytelling that I actually enjoy. Um, I enjoy the idea of making it on your own, finding a way, and the best parts of people sort of coming out, our survival instinct, the thing that's made us so so vibrant, so that's just that well made us us, you know, over all of this, all of time up to this point, that's driven us to the point that we are now. I that thing that kicks in naturally, where I love that, and I love the idea of sort of being thrown into your environment at a very young age and having to find that, the thing that defines you. And um, that's really one of the reasons why, like, you get a character like Ramona at the age that she is because that's when you sort of hit that point in your life when you're sort of being forced into the world, into the real world, the adult world, and you're sort of finding yourself and you're defining yourself, and you are either you hit that point when you are usually you either find yourself pushing further and further into a group setting, where you're less defined as an individual and more you want to fit in, or you go almost the polar opposite. Granted, these are those are wild generalizations. I mean, obviously you can go somewhere in between, but you do find that a lot. In observations of sort of social settings where you see that, where you get these wildly divergent paths, and um, that's usually around when it happens, when you and your friends start realizing that you don't relate as much, and you find yourself spending less and less time with your childhood friends, and maybe you start redefining friendship, with friendships with other people that you have a different things appeal to you suddenly, and uh, that's why I tend to start out my characters at this age, and certainly with Ramona because I want to tackle that sort of concept, but sort of in an indirect way. The overall story is that it's sort of like the metaphor for that kind of thing, for growing up and reaching adulthood and all the crap that happens to you as you're moving into adulthood and sort of being pushed out into the world, but in her case, in a very literal sense. Um, but I removed her direct parents from the scenario and instead put in um, a substitute. And I wanted the elf, whose name I'm withholding on purpose for right now, because there's a whole bit of dialogue with that. But I'm having a hard time sort of, I'm having a hard time dancing around her name. But I decided that she would be a good substitute because she's not very motherly, but just motherly enough, and um, she would be harsh enough as a stranger that she would encourage the independence of Ramona and encourage some growth in her. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a character like that, and it took a long time to sort of figure it out because I mean, like I was saying, initially she was a man, um, and initially she was a a crush, and this is like a very early version of the story where she was actually a crush, a love interest for Ramona, um, that was not directly related to the group that I was trying to create. Um, and I thought that was just, I thought it was stupid. I thought it was a dumb, 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 dumb idea to make it so that she wasn't necessarily chasing behind some boy, um, but that there was this um, character who would show up, this brooding, silent type who would show up, and Ramona would swoon over him or something. I when I realized that that was the path that that story was going to go down, I deleted it. I just immediately went the up. I had to go in a different direction, and it took a while. It took certainly a few tries and a little bit more development before I landed on the elf woman, and it really took me going back through all the different versions of Myth of Eustro up to that point, and realizing how much I had moved away from the original version of Ramona, whose name I cannot remember, but it's almost Ramona, but it's not Ramona. Um, but how much I had moved away from her character and gone in so many other directions. Um, and I decided, I decided to, I found my answer in those older versions of the story. Usually, it seems like that's the way that it tends to work. Sometimes that those first versions, the first time, there's usually some truth in what comes out of you initially. What sort of pours out of you spontaneously. There's usually um, something there's something golden about that, and there was definitely something there um, in that first version of Eustro that I was able to work with that. I was able to chip away from it and use that in a very healthy way. And, I went with my instinct with the characters, and uh, one of the reasons why the elf woman is an elf woman is because I ended up at one version of the Ramona character was paired up with, again, instead of Effie, she was paired up with a boy, um, and the problem was that the boy became the main character. His character overtook Ramona's character, and that became a problem for me. That he started outshining. I found myself fascinated with his character more, and I found myself fascinated with his character more because he was actually paired up with his mother, and there was a nice back and forth between him and his mother, and I realized that because he had a mother, it allowed him to grow as a character. Um, it it gave him heart. It added something that, well, human. It added something very human, and um, for this character to exist in his life, and For me, because of the way that my mind works, the potential, the possibility that she may get taken away, um, she may get taken from the story, and it's just like, is this a tragedy? Is this what's going to happen? But that existed, and I realized that it didn't exist for the Ramona character. Her parents were supposed to be dead, and so it left her with no one to really play off of in that sense. A parent, um, a parental figure. There was no one to sort of play off of. Someone, you get the wise character that sort of hands down knowledge of their experiences from your age all the way up to their age. And there wasn't that character, um, except when I got rid of the extra boy, and I had the the mother, but she couldn't be a mother, and she eventually disappeared, and then merged with the elf woman, or the man who turned into an elf man and then into the elf woman when he merged with the mother character. And the best part about it was, even though she's a mother character, she was not seen in that stereotypical mother sense, and this was something that I actually had tested out initially accidentally, but then ran with while I was in school. I created the character while I was in school, and one of my teachers was looking through my work and commented on the character and said, "She's not a mother." And I said, how is she not a mother? And he said, "She doesn't look like a mother, and she doesn't really act like a mother." And right then I knew we were at odds, because right then and there I was like, well, I knew I had something, because I knew his brain went to a stereotypical place. He thought she doesn't look like a mother because she walked around, she wore overalls, she was a mechanic, she was very industrious, she used her hands a lot. She was an inventor. Um, she had very wild hair. She wore a headband. She looked very, she was very, very laid back, very street, very industrial. She looked like a mechanic, and she was very bubbly, and she just kind of, she was always encouraging her kid, and um, she, gosh, what else? Oh, she had pierced ears, and just stuff like that. And I realized that there was not only a uh, a difference, in a generational difference, as far as perception of role models, but then also there was a conditioning going on here, a conditioning of media, and I wanted to go ahead and purposely eradicate that. I wanted to go in and say, no, any character can be a mother character. I mean, who are you to say that she's not a mother? She's a mother. She loves her kid just as much. And I did say some of this to it to some degree. She does. I knew people that looked like her, that were wonderful parents, wonderful mothers, and it made no sense for him to say that she couldn't be a mother character because of the way that she looked and the way that she acted in the scenario that I created, because that is not purely what makes you a mother. Certainly not the way that you look does not define what is a mother. It is uh, the, the, the behavior, the relationship that you have with the child that makes the mother. And that's why this elf character can be the mother character for Ramona because of the relationship that I want to create for them. Um, but it's I kind of lost the thread on that one, but you sort of get what I'm saying. It was really interesting, and I just sort of I ran with it. But that was the sort of the development of that character, those characters, period. But I thought it was sort of fun, honestly, that all of these things sort of started coming together. These things that initially started off as a card game. It was supposed to be a tabletop card game that morphed into this weird tabletop card game with an RPG board, like a grid um, tabletop board, and I'm sorry, it morphed into many different versions of itself, and it spun out of control, and um, it wasn't that great. Honestly, it wasn't that great. Uh, I I had friends play it, and it was too easy. But I'm not the best at. There's a very specific mentality to um, game creation, to actual game creation. The best puzzle masters, these people that actually create really enticing, inventive uh, levels, level design, and I'm more so thinking of video games than just games in general. But games in general, uh, that mentality, that sort of mind, the way that mind works, that's not the way that my mind works. There's a level of mystery building there that is beyond me. And I realized it then, and that's kind of why I initially abandoned the entire Myth of Eustro project, because it was supposed to just be a game that I created D&D style scenarios for, which is nonsensical when I look back at it now. It makes no sense the way the game played and the way that I wanted the game to be set up. It it didn't make sense. It was ill conceived, honestly, like so many things. But I'm glad where it eventually ended up. I mean, it took a decade to get there, roughly a decade to get there, but I like the place that it ended up in the end. And I like the characters that came out of it in the end. They're probably some of the healthiest characters, um, the most well-rounded characters that I've created in ever, honestly, ever. They are, I know these characters almost inside and out 100%. Usually, I'm still learning characters as I go, but these characters, um, I took my time with developing a lot of aspects of them so that this story, I never have a problem creating so far any of the chapters in it. I haven't really had a problem with any of them. Certainly challenges, yes. I mean, you're going to have challenges, but never any problem understanding um, where these characters are coming from, where they're going, and what I want them to do. They just do it, and I sort of I think that has a lot to do with that that very long development process, and not sort of not rushing them to market basically, and trying to get this story out, and letting it sort of age. Uh, gosh, I don't. I feel like I've sort of run out of steam on talking about this, and honestly, I I I know that for chapter two, there's lots more that I could talk about in this world. So I'll honestly just continue talking about this kind of stuff come chapter two. And instead, I'll go ahead and end this because we hit the hour mark. And so thank you for listening to me just sort of ramble, honestly, especially somewhere around the middle when I went off on some weird tangent and lost myself and probably honestly edited out some of that because there was a huge rambling period. But thank you anyways for listening. And I mean, and thanks for watching. And especially thank you for reading. Thank you so much. Bye.